ancient breeds over in the Middle East and Asia, and those they're semi-tame. They're pretty much like they're more similar towards like jackals, but they're still considered like a dog or a canine, and they kind of live on the outskirts of towns if they're wild or feral, but they're actually recognized by the AKC. And so here's a picture right here. It's called the Carolina dog, or the American dingo. That's what they recognize it as. Okay, so the founding females, like I said, there's another theory that there's 3 founding females, like sort of like Adam and Eve, but the 3 females instead of the 14 ancient breeds. So this may be, well, this one lacks evidence, like support, like DNA evidence. Many scientists believe that there were 3 founding females, and they think that wolves and dogs were one species. So that's just a different way to look at it rather than the 14 ancient breeds. Okay, so the canine genome, so paternal and maternal lineages. So what I talked about before is they combine the analysis of the Y chromosome markers, which is paternally inherited, the maternally inherited mitochondrial DNA, and then the autosomal microsatellite markers, which were inherited by both parents. And that helped assess the contribution of each sex in the origin of some breeds. Wolves are generally monogamous, so the alpha male only bred with the alpha female, rather than dogs. They're kind of random, so that was supported by the lack of patterns in their genetics. The microsatellite genomes, the molecular markers, were used to study the genetic relationships between the breeds, and what their goal was to correctly assign 99% of the dogs to the correct breeds. So what this would help benefit was like going to the veterinary office, like a mixed breed, they don't know what kind of dog it is exactly, so they can take their DNA and then they will, that DNA will get correctly assigned to their breed just on a computer. And they did that successfully. Only 4 of the breeds were placed wrong. So they used a Bayesian model-based clustering algorithm, which they took these breeds that were more similar to each other and they placed them on a chart. And then those animals were like more similar to each other, but it also showed how much of maybe other breeds or DNA they may have gotten over the generations. So this is one of the charts. I have 3, but this is like the one that's most understandable. So K equals 2, so that's like cluster 2, cluster 3, cluster 4. And these are all different types of dogs. I think those are, yeah, some of the more breeds have been around more longer. So what they showed right here was they split them up. I can't really move it. So Asian and ancient breeds are right here in this cluster, herding, and then there are more. I think there's herding and working dogs over there. And so these colors mark how much they have in there. So phenotypic differences, it's very obvious that dogs may look completely opposite from another. Like you compare a Great Dane, which is huge, to a little Chihuahua that's just really small. And so that's why they think that right now it's the greatest experiment ever conducted by geneticists today, because it's just so varied and it's kind of random. There's no pattern to it like there are with wolves. And phylogeny, so that's the history of the lineages of organisms as they change through time. So it shows the different morphologies that they went through and compares the evolution. And so what they did to compare like the body structure is they took DNA from 14 small dogs, and they all found a relationship that they had one haplotype, or like one gene, that was the same, and they concluded that that one gene is what caused them to be small. And so it's just one morphology that changed years and years ago that made that whole small breed line. And that happened a really long time ago, because if you remember, on the 14 ancient breeds, there were small dogs on that list. So this happened quite a long time ago. Not sure how, but it did. And then many tests show that they have different alleles that had affected their coloring and their texture of their coat, or how long it is. And then 95% of all coat variations, and yeah, the combination of those alleles, I didn't name them, but they're called wild type. That's what made them change. So any questions from you guys? Any clarification on some of the slides?
Well, I just had a question on whether you think the domestication was accidental, or if it was on purpose, or it was just kind of like a coincidence. Like, what is your personal opinion on it?
I think it was on purpose because I know they domesticated livestock animals and cats and animals like that. So I think that dogs had a purpose, or wolves. They're very strong. You know, I think they might have been used for working or something like that. I just think that they just wanted to domesticate those animals for whatever reason they had.
What, what do you prefer to think is better, like, or should have been natural selection or like pure breeding?
Well, without artificial selection, we wouldn't have like actual dogs. We'd still just have like wolves or like wolf-like type dogs. So artificial selection, that's what really changed the different dog breeds. Like there wouldn't be as many breeds around. So if there's only going to be natural selection, then we wouldn't have the breed diversity we have today. So, I mean, natural selection sounds better, but you know, I wouldn't have my little dog if there was no artificial selection, basically.
What's the reliability of the DNA testing that you could buy over the counter at the store if the dog breeds are all related to just these few 14? How narrow can they get the results for those DNA testing?
Well, there's like 400 different AKC breeds, and I think just about half of them are recognized. So it may not be as accurate as it may be in the future. But in the future, what their goal is they want the 100% of the dogs to be correctly placed in which breed, because they recognize, you know, a lot of breeds. Some of them I didn't even know what they were or what they looked like, and they were still correctly assigned to the at least same group, like the herding group or working group, sporting group. They were placed in the right group, just not as the same breed. So right now it may not be as accurate. So like they place Chihuahua in like the herding group or something like that, and they place like the Beagle and I think herding as well. So some of them weren't placed right. So it's not completely accurate as of right now, but it will be.
What's AKC?
The American Kennel Club. So that's like when you watch dog shows on TV, that's what the AKC show breeds are.
Okay.
So that, was he a French scientist or whatever?
He was a Russian scientist.
The
Yeah.
Russian scientist who did that experiment on foxes. He noticed that like their ears were getting floppy and that they would bark and stuff. And I think like what most people accept is that like we bred these features, like we chose like artificial selection, but because he wasn't like purposefully trying to breed for those.
He wanted to make them more tolerant towards humans, so he didn't want to change them. He wanted to still make them, well, he didn't want to change their breed. He used to want them to be foxes. He just wanted them not to be so mean towards humans. So he wanted them to be more tolerant, basically. And that story may not be really reliable because one of my sources said that, you know, that's like a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, because it takes a really long time for these animals to evolve, not just that, you know, 50 years, 100 years, however long that experiment went on. That's really, really short time period for evolving that much. But,
His conclusion might be that we didn't necessarily choose these traits, but that because they became tamer, like they developed those characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Any other questions? Okay.